was a good warm-up. Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann. Yesterday, the minister refused to accept that it was wrong to hound Nadia Seabright over an illegal robo-debt when she was 8 months pregnant. Kath Madgwick's son, Jared, was issued a robo-debt under Mr. Morrison's illegal scheme. Jared tragically took his own life after reading a letter from Centrelink about his robo-debt, and Ms. Madgwick believes the letter, quote, tipped him over the edge. Does the Prime Minister now accept it was wrong to hound vulnerable Australians like Jared as a result of the illegal robo-debt scheme he designed and implemented?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As I've indicated to the chamber yesterday, we received advice at the time that the program was put together, that it was lawful. Many governments have in fact used ATO averaging data over many years, Labor and Liberal. Services Australia makes $180 billion in payments every year. As I've also put on the record in the Senate yesterday, Ms. Plibersek, Mr. Shorten and Mr. Bowen have previously supported debt recovery in the context of overpayments having been made.
Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
Rachel is a 64-year-old woman living in a remote Aboriginal community. Her son passed away in traumatic circumstances in 2018. The next year, Centrelink sent a letter to her son's estate demanding payment of $3,300. Rachel then received a letter to her late son asking him to verify his employment records from 5 years earlier, leaving her distraught. Does the Prime Minister believe that Rachel deserves an apology?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I refer Senator Keneally to my first answer and to the statements by Ms. Plibersek, Mr. Shorten and Mr. Bowen in support for debt recovery in relation to these payments.
Order. He's concluded his answer, Senator Wong. I'll call Senator Keneally for a final supplementary question.
Does the Prime Minister think the suffering experienced by Rachel, Jared, and more than 500,000 Australians was worth it?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I refer Senator Keneally to my first answer.
Order. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann. Can the minister inform the Senate how Australia's economy is leading the developed world in its recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic-induced economic crisis?
The Minister for Finance, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Brockman for that very important question. Mr. President, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development has released a very important report overnight, which shows the devastating effects of COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic is having on the world economy. Importantly, what the OECD report shows is that Australia is leading the developed world in our economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. The OECD expects economic growth in Australia to rebound despite the global economy facing, and I'm quoting the OECD, the deepest recession since the Great Depression, with the loss of income exceeding any previous recession over the last 100 years outside wartime, with dire and long-lasting consequences for people, firms and governments. The OECD is forecasting global growth to fall by at least 6% in 2020, and that is in the absence of a second wave of infections. To put this in context, global growth fell by just 0.1% in 2009 during the so-called global financial crisis, and is now forecast to fall by at least 6% as long as we can avoid a second wave of infections. According to the OECD, the outlook for Australia is the third best among all OECD members. The OECD forecast for Australia is for GDP to contract by 5% in 2020 before bouncing back to 4.1% growth in 2021. Australia's economic outlook for 2020 compares remarkably well with other countries. The United Kingdom is forecast to contract by 11.5%, France by 11.4%, Italy by 11.3%, New Zealand by 8.9%, Canada by 8%, the United States by 7.3%, and indeed the OECD average is the OECD average contraction
Senator
of
Cormann. Time for the
7.5%.
answer has expired. Senator Brockman, a supplementary question.
Mr President, and thank the Minister for the first answer. Can the Minister inform the Senate of the dangers to our economy if a second wave of COVID-19 hits Australia?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Yes, I can. The OECD report makes it very clear that the economic consequences of a second wave of infections would be dire for both the Australian and the world economies. In the event of a second wave, the report said the global economy would likely contract by a further 1.6%. The Australian economy would contract by a further 1.3%. That means our economic contraction would jump from 5% to 6.3% under the second wave scenario, which would be an extra $25 billion blow to our economy. But it wouldn't stop there. A second wave would also hit our forecast recovery in 2021 by 3.1%, which would mean an $80 billion blow to our economy over 2 years. That would cost thousands of Australian jobs. That is why every Australian has a patriotic duty to do everything they can to help minimise the risk of a second wave. That is why every Australian must heed the health advice and not attend mass protests at this time.
Order. Senator Brockman, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister inform the Senate about what else the OECD has said about Australia's response to the COVID-19 crisis?
Order. Order. I'll call Senator Cormann when there's silence. Senator Cormann. Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Brockman for that supplementary question. The OECD has praised Australia for acting quickly to close our borders and put in place the necessary health restrictions, which helped us to successfully flatten the curve. The OECD had praised Australia for its massive macroeconomic support. That economic support was only possible because we entered this crisis from a position of economic and fiscal strength. Growth was increasing at the end of last year, unemployment was falling in February, we had returned the budget to balance for the first time in 11 years. Because of that strength, we have been able to provide support of $260 billion or 13.3% of GDP in support of workers, households and business. There is still a long way to go in recovering from this once-in-a-100-year global pandemic, but we're heading in the right direction. It is important that we remain vigilant and that all Australians do everything they can to avoid a second wave of infection.
Senator Kitching.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Government Services, Senator Ruston. Internal Centrelink documents show that the government ignored warnings to Services Australia as early as March 2016 of a, quote, major risk that automated Centrelink robo-debts could be inaccurate. Throughout 2017, the government ignored warnings when the Administrative Appeals Tribunal repeatedly found that the basis on which robo-debts were calculated was wrong and unlawful. On what date did the government first become aware that its robo-debt scheme was illegal?
The Minister representing the Minister for Government Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Senator Kitching, for your question on this matter. Can I state at the outset of this question that given that this matter is currently before the courts, I am extremely mindful that anything that I might say could have legal implications, and so I cannot provide any further comment specifically in relation to anything in relating to the legal aspects of this matter. But what I can say is that this government is acting to repay these people. And in fact, I think, if I remember correctly, the Minister for Government Services, Stuart Robert, did a press conference on the 19th of November last year, where he made an announcement that the intention of the government was intending to pause its debt recovery using income averaging as its sole reason for raising the debt.
Senator Kitching, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. The Attorney-General has claimed that the government had legal advice supporting the robo-debt program designed by Mr Morrison during his time as Social Services Minister. It has been reported that the only advice was about procedural fairness under administrative law from a junior legal officer. Is this correct?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I draw the senators my answer to the previous question in relation to any comments that I intend to make, or for that matter not make, in relation to this particular matter. However, what I would say, following my response to the primary part of your question, is that last November we did make changes in relation to this particular program on the back of the decision by the government at that time that we would cease pause the recovery of debts in relation to the income compliance program. But I think the most important thing that's worth the chamber understanding is that since my time as the Social Services Minister and also during the time that Minister Fletcher was the Minister for Social Services, we also embarked on some significant reforms in the social services area in relation to single-touch payroll and also for the change of assessment model.
Order, Senator Ruston. Time has expired. Senator Kitching, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. It was reported yesterday that the total value of unlawful debts issued under the scheme may total $1 billion. How much exactly will the government's failure to listen to the warnings about Mr Morrison's robo-debt scheme cost the Australian taxpayer?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And once again, Senator Kitching, as I have said to the answers to the principal question and the first supplementary question, I will be not making any comments in relation to this matter because it is currently before the courts. However, as I said, as I was attempting to advise the Senate of some very positive initiatives that have been put in place in the last 12 months in relation to making sure, first and foremost, that people don't incur debts in the first place. And by using technology such as single-touch payroll and the change of assessment model, which sadly won't be able to come into play on the 1st of July as it previous, but hopefully we'll get it in August, to make sure that Australians who are reporting their income accurately, because we give them the tools to do so. Because by simplifying the model by which people are able to report income, we hope to be able to reduce the amount that people are incurring in debts.
Order. Order. Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash. Can the Minister update the Senate on the state of the government's health response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how Australia is leading the world in health recovery?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Chandler for your question. Mr. President, over the last few months, Australians have worked together to suppress COVID-19, giving us time to prepare our health system to live with the virus. As a country, we have used this time well, sourcing additional ventilators and personal protective equipment and making plans for our hospitals to respond to a surge in cases. We have, as we know, expanded our testing regime, developed our capability to respond quickly to new cases and outbreaks, and we've improved our ability to identify quickly people who may have been exposed to the virus. Working together, we have now reduced the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 to 20, and the number of people in ICU because of COVID-19 has now been reduced to 3. Yesterday, there were only 7 new cases reported across the whole of Australia, 4 new cases in Victoria and 3 new cases in New South Wales. Mr. President, as we know, on the 8th of May, the National Cabinet agreed to a 3-step plan to gradually remove the COVID-19 restrictions and for all of us to move towards the new COVID-safe economy. While Australians can, of course, see that road back, it does not mean that we cannot remain vigilant. We need to, in particular in observing social distancing practices. We now have seen 1.6 million tests conducted across Australia. Of those, 7,276 Australians have been diagnosed with COVID-19 and, sadly, 102 have lost their lives. But the rate of positive returns has now dropped to 0.4% across those 1.6 million tests.
Senator Chandler, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister advise the Senate why it is important to remain vigilant in following public health directions during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what are the risks of failing to remain vigilant?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, it is critical that we remain vigilant to ensure we do not risk further outbreaks. That just happens to be our reality as a country. As the Chief Medical Officer has said, make no mistake, this virus is still in our community. The OECD research today has made it abundantly clear the risks of a second wave are real, and a second wave will have both profound health and economic impacts. The OECD does expect Australia to rebound, despite the global economy facing the deepest recession since the Great Depression. The OECD's outlook for Australia is the third best amongst all 36 OECD nations. But a second wave of COVID-19 infections would wipe out 4 years of economic growth in Australia and expose highly indebted mortgage holders to possible mass defaults.
Senator Chandler, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what steps can Australians take to minimise the risk of a second wave?
Senator Cash.
Mr President, we cannot throw away all of the sacrifices and hard work that we have made collectively as a nation together over the past few months to contain the virus. It is critical that all of us, every single one of us, continue to ensure we do not put the lives of others at risk and the livelihoods of our family, our friends, but most importantly, the most vulnerable Australians. We all need to ensure that we exercise an abundance of caution and follow the medical advice on the additional and practical steps that we all need to take, including staying 1.5 metres away from other people whenever and wherever possible, maintaining good hand washing, coughing, sneezing, hygiene, staying at home if we're unwell, and getting tested if respiratory symptoms we have them or a fever. We have shown what we can achieve together.
Order. Senator
Let's
Cash,
not
time
throw it away.
has expired. Senator Griff.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston. New South Wales and the Northern Territory have become the first jurisdictions to restart pokies. Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced gaming venues could possibly be allowed to open as part of Step 3 by July. Australians saved $3 billion since the pokies have shut, with many gamblers forced to go cold turkey with their pokies addictions. The money saved had been spent in other areas of the economy rather than lost down poker machines. Advocates against gambling harm are concerned about the significant health risks of restarting the pokies during such a vulnerable time. Does the government share these concerns that a resumption of pokies will lead to a rise in gambling-related health and social harm?
Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you very much, Senator Griff, for your question. First and foremost, can I say the government takes that gambling harm that may be caused to Australians very, very seriously. We're certainly aware of the recent reports that people might be going back to their pre-COVID gambling habits despite the social distancing requirements that exist within gambling venues. And we're also aware of reports from analytics consultancy Alpha Beta and the credit firm Ilion on changes to people's gambling habits during the first few months of the corona pandemic. It is for this very reason, in the protection of Australians and gambling, that the Australian government embarked on a program of reform within the gambling sector to put in place the National Consumer Protection Framework to make sure for online wagering. And it's very much the centrepiece of Australia's gambling reforms, because we want to help make sure that consumers are protected no matter where they are in Australia. And it also provides a framework that empowers Australians through the use of tools to make sure that they control their own behaviours with their online gambling habits. So we take very, very seriously making sure that Australians have got the tools that they can protect themselves. But what I would say, Senator Griff, is that state and territory governments have the primary responsibility for licensing and regulating land-based gambling establishments, to which you are largely referring in your primary question. Obviously, as the federal government and through many of our agreements and the relationships that we continue to have and probably have been enhanced over recent times with our discussions with our state and territory counterparts, we are working to make sure that through this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in at the moment, that we are working together to put in place protections to make sure that we can assist Australians to get to the other side of this pandemic.
Senator Griff, a supplementary question.
Minister, the uncertainty caused by COVID-19 has triggered many mental health problems in our communities, particularly amongst at-risk gamblers. Now, last year the Senate backed my motion asking the federal government to address gambling as a national public health issue, noting the links between gambling, family violence and mental ill health. Has the government given any further consideration to the motion that was passed by the Senate last year, and if not, why not?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Senator Griff. And of course, motions passed in this place, the government takes them all very seriously. But one of the things that has been, I think, very important in the delivery of your request and your desire to make sure that greater assistance was put in place for people who find themselves with a gambling addiction has been twofold. One has been the recognition by this government through the COVID pandemic of the greater need for assistance and support and financial resourcing of our mental health services to make sure that those people that find themselves in a position where their mental health is being impacted on by how the coronavirus pandemic has been impacted them have got the research and the support that they are able to they need to be able to help them. The other thing that we have done is also provide a significant increase in the amount of money that's been made available to financial counselling services and also making sure that people are aware where those services are available so that they can also assist them through
Senator
this time.
Ruston. Senator Griff, a final supplementary question.
Minister, the current GST distribution, and I know you may have to take this on notice, effectively penalises states which choose to take action against gambling interests by not recognising any change in their fiscal capacity. Will the government undertake to work with the National Cabinet to ensure that states are not penalised for public health and social services initiatives which address gambling harm and reduce taxation revenue?
Senator Ruston.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Griffin. Thank you very much for giving me the answer to my question during the question that you were actually asking. Of course, matters in relation to GST are matters for the Treasurer and the Finance Minister, and I am not going to seek to make any commentary about that. But what I would say and reiterate is that this government takes very seriously our responsibilities to work with all jurisdictions to make sure that people who are impacted by gambling-related harm have the supports in place, first of all to be able to assist them through things, as we mentioned in the previous question, mental health, but also the support so they can deal with their addictions and the harm that they are causing potentially to themselves and their families through their addiction. And we will continue to work with the states and territories. We will continue to work through the National Consumer Protection Framework. We will continue to work through the National Exclusion Register to make sure that we continue to make advances in this area so that we can continue to protect Australians who are at risk of gambling-related harm.
Senator Green.
My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Cormann. Today, the member for Leichhardt called for Mr Morrison to extend JobKeeper, saying, and I quote, "There is a very strong argument, and the figures that were released today show you how important it is that we continue to have this support within our community. Will Mr Morrison give this support to communities in far north Queensland facing Australia's first recession in 29 years?
Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Green for that question. Our government has made responsible decisions right from the outset of this crisis. We've made decisions to save lives and to save livelihoods, and we'll continue to make those decisions. We'll continue to make responsible decisions moving forward. The Senator will be well aware of the Treasury review that has been well and truly publicly canvassed. Once the findings and recommendations of that review are received, the government will be making further responsible decisions, and I can reassure the people of North Queensland that our government is very, very focused on their best interests. And of course the most important thing that the people of North Queensland would like to see right now is the removal of state borders so that the planes can start flying again, so that the tourists can go to North Queensland again. And if you were interested in the people of, if you were interested in the best interest of the people of North Queensland, you would be calling on Premier Palaszczuk to remove those state borders.
Order on my right, now on my left. I'll call Senator Green when there's silence. When there's silence, I'll call your colleague, Senator Watt. Senator Wong. Senator Colbeck. Senator... Order. I will call Senator... We are wasting time for non-government senators with constant interjections. Senator Green.
A survey of 2,300 Australian company directors found, and I quote, 81% would prefer to see a cautious phasing out of stimulus policies such as JobKeeper, rather than a rapid wind down. Why is the government refusing to give Australian businesses confidence that JobKeeper will continue past September where needed?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Businesses across Australia can have confidence that our government will continue to make responsible decisions to save lives, to protect Australians from the risk of a second wave of infections, to minimise the risk of a second wave of infections, and to also ensure that we can have a strong, responsible economic recovery on the other side.
Senator Pratt.
As the OECD has clearly outlined in its report released overnight, Australia is leading the developed world when it comes to the economic recovery in the context of this coronavirus crisis, and will continue to make the decisions that are required, and businesses around Australia overwhelmingly know that.
Senator Green, a final supplementary question.
The OECD, the RBA governor, 2,300 company directors and the government's own backbench are calling for the JobKeeper program to be extended beyond September. How many Australians will lose their jobs because of Mr Morrison's stubborn insistence that JobKeeper snap back in September?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, the OECD has said that Australia is leading the developed world when it comes to the economic recovery in the wake of the coronavirus crisis, and the OECD has also predicted a bounce back in economic growth in Australia in 2021, which the OECD has also outlined that the comparative position of the Australian economy is materially better than the position of economies in many other parts of the world. We'll continue to make the decisions that are required, including decisions to minimise the risk of a second wave of infections, because that is so important to protect people's health, and it's also so important to protect our economy and to protect jobs. And I say it again, if Senator Green is committed to the best interests of the people of Queensland, she will join the coalition in calling on Premier Palaszczuk to remove those state border restrictions in Queensland, so that people from the great state of New South Wales can go on holidays in North Queensland, can spend money in North Queensland, and
Order. Order on my left and my right. Senator Cormann, on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Point of order.
Point of order. I think interjections are always disorderly, but if interjections are made, they should at least be directly relevant. And I don't know how South Australia would be directly relevant to a question about Queensland.
Order. I'll give. That wasn't a point of order, and I might say that the interjections were coming from across the two main sides of the chamber and not from the far end. So I call on those on my left and right. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann. Senator, does art matter?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann.
Yes.
Senator Hanson-Young.
If art matters, I've got a supplementary question,
Senator Hanson-Young.
If art matters to this government and the Prime Minister, why has the PM not used the words art or artist since the COVID crisis started? How many times has the Prime Minister said the words art or artist since the crisis started? How many times has the Prime Minister uttered the words football, footy and construction?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I don't think it would surprise Senator Hanson-Young that I will have to take that very important question on notice so that I can provide an accurate answer to that forensic question about a very important matter of public policy.
Senator Hanson-Young, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is it true that the arts and recreation industry employs 50% female workers, while the construction and building industry is only 14%? Does this government believe arts jobs matters, and do they believe women's jobs matter?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Of course, this government believes that women's jobs matter. Before the COVID crisis hit, we had secured record female workforce participation in our economy, the best ever. And indeed, the gender pay gap was the lowest ever. And that is on the back of course, our national economic plan for growth, for stronger growth, and indeed because of the leadership provided by a number of distinguished and outstanding senior cabinet ministers, including, of course, the Minister for Women's Interests, Senator Payne, and her predecessors, who have done outstanding work in promoting the cause and the women's economic interests in the context of our government.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann. Southeast Asian nations like Taiwan quickly learned, with regard to COVID, that they just had to isolate the sick and the vulnerable, and that allowed healthy and productive people and businesses to keep working and earning money. The result is that their economy in Taiwan and other Southeast Asian nations remained healthy, and they had far fewer deaths than Australia. Minister, was there any consideration given in April to changing Australia's COVID strategy when Taiwan and other Southeast Asian nations had already proved that their strategy worked and was far superior to your government's strategy?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. When the crisis hit, there's no question that we considered a whole range of alternative options on how best to respond to it, but in making decisions and in making judgments, we were guided by the advice of relevant experts. And in relation to how best to deal with the health threat, we were guided principally by the advice of the Australian Health Principles Protection Committee, the chief medical and chief health officers from around Australia and the Commonwealth. And I think it's fair to say, and for a range of reasons, but the early decision to impose border restrictions in terms of non-residents who'd spent any time over the previous 14 days in mainland China, not being able to come to Australia, and imposing quarantine requirements on Australians and permanent residents having spent time over the previous 14 days in mainland China has demonstrably helped delay the spread of the virus, giving us time to prepare, both in terms of the hospital capacity to deal with the potential inflow of patients, but also to prepare the risk management processes that would best equip us to save lives by slowing down and suppressing the spread of the virus, and helping to put, of course, the economic support measures in place. Well, every single death is tragic, and it's one more than you would like to see. But again, comparatively speaking, the number of deaths in Australia is very low internationally. The number of infections is very low. The number of community transmission is extremely low right now, and we believe that by and large our strategy has worked. Now, this is not a perfect environment. We were presented with a rapidly evolving crisis situation. We made the best possible judgments in the circumstances, guided by the expert advice. On balance, I believe that we have made good decisions as a country.
Senator Roberts, supplementary
Thank you,
question.
Mr. President. I acknowledge Senator Cormann's statement, but he fails to acknowledge that the economy has been devastated as a result of the government's strategy when other economies have not been devastated. Minister, hasn't your government's COVID strategy put the Australian economy and many Australian small businesses and jobs at unnecessary risk and left us with a debt we had to have?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is certainly true that we were forced to impose significant sacrifices on many Australians. We put the restrictions that we had to put in place as a country on the economy in order to save lives by slowing down and suppressing the spread of the virus has imposed, of course, significant burdens on many businesses and on many working Australians. That's why we put in place the economic support package that we have in order to keep as many businesses in business through the transition as possible, to keep as many working Australians connected to their employer during this transition as possible, and to provide enhanced support to those Australians who, through no fault of their own, lost their job because of the coronavirus crisis. Now, you can argue whether one decision or the other decision could have been made differently, but if you look at the outcomes, if you look at the actual outcomes, both on the health front and on an economic front, I think that Australia is in a very good position, comparatively speaking, to other countries around the world.
Senator Roberts, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Minister, everyday Australians want to know how the Prime Minister will ensure that if businesses do close or go into liquidation, that receivers and administrators will ensure that Australian jobs are preserved and that affected businesses can only be sold to Australians first and not be cheaply flogged off to foreigners.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, in relation to foreign investment, you'd be aware that the Treasury has put in place some temporary measures to ensure that Australian businesses dealing with the consequences and the impact of the coronavirus crisis are protected as appropriate in the context of any attempted foreign takeover. But in a broader sense, when we of course focused on doing everything we can to maximise the strength of the economic recovery on the other side. And let me also say that on the other side, in order to maximise the strength of the economic recovery, we will need to rely on foreign investment into the future to maximise our economic growth opportunities into the future.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann. Yesterday the Minister said, and I quote, "I will not rule out adjustments at the end of the review." This morning Mr Morrison guaranteed that JobKeeper will remain until September for industries other than childcare. Who is correct?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Both those statements are correct. And in fact, they don't understand the English language, seemingly, Mr. President. I've made this point over 3.5 hours at the Senate COVID committee the other day, and I've made the point yesterday. And I've said it in the media on I don't know how many occasions. Yes, the JobKeeper program is legislated. That's a statement of fact. The JobKeeper program is legislated for 6 months. We've also said that there is a review which was always scheduled to take place about halfway through into the operation of the JobKeeper program. I can't preempt what the findings of that review will be, which I have not yet seen. I can't preempt what the recommendations may or may not be. Indeed, whether there are any recommendations at all. But what I can tell you is that the JobKeeper program is legislated and will be in place for the 6 months, which we've all said. And that statement you're attributing, the statement that I made about adjustments that may be made, is not inconsistent with the statement that the JobKeeper program will be in place for 6 months, which it will be.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr Morrison also said this morning that the review was, and I quote, about how you're implementing the program. There's a lot of administrative issues and things like that. Was the review directed to only consider implementation and administration, or is it open to the review to recommend that JobKeeper will end early for some industries?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As I've also indicated publicly, we don't have any proposal in front of us. We're not considering any proposal. We're not expecting any proposal to end the JobKeeper program for any other sector. In relation to childcare, it was a specific proposal that was initiated by the sector itself, because there was a better, fairer, more equitable way to provide transitional support to that industry, given the activity levels across childcare centres had significantly increased again. The reason JobKeeper was put in place for the childcare sector was in the context of a drop in activity levels. The childcare subsidy was no longer generating revenue. With activity levels going back up, there is, of course, now a capacity to generate revenue, government revenue, through childcare subsidies, as well as government, as well as parental contributions, as well as transitional payment of $708 million by the government. So, I mean, what we're doing here is entirely appropriate. I mean, you are arguing that we should keep childcare free forever.
Senator Gallagher, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Given it took only 3 days for Mr Morrison to break his promise to keep JobKeeper until September for childcare workers, can Australians trust Mr Morrison's promise today? And will Mr Morrison rule out breaking his promise to other workers?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I completely reject the premise of the question. Australians know that they can trust the Prime Minister and the Morrison government that we will do everything we can. We will do everything we can to avoid a second wave of infections, and we will do everything we can to maximise the strength of the economic recovery on the other side. And
Senator Wong.
And the Australian people know, the Australian people are relieved that they don't have a socialist, anti-business, anti-growth government in government right now to deal with this crisis.
Senator Abetz.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Can the Minister update the Senate on the importance of Australia's relationship with India, and how is the government strengthening our bilateral ties?
Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Abetz both for his question and particularly his interest in this matter, given that he is the Australian patron of the Australia-India alliance. What the Morrison government is doing is delivering on our commitment to deepen Australia's relationships with key partners in the Indo-Pacific. India is, of course, the world's most populous democracy and a rising economic and strategic power in our region. And last week, Prime Ministers Morrison and Modi held a virtual summit, India's first, indeed, a landmark moment in the ties between our nations. Australia and India agreed and announced that we will elevate our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, underpinned by democratic principles, the shared promotion of the rules-based international order and the preservation of an open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. In a time of what are great global challenges, it's more important than ever that countries such as Australia and India come together to reinforce our common values. A new joint declaration on maritime cooperation signals the commitment of Australia and India to a rules-based maritime order in the Indo-Pacific, which is founded on respect for the sovereignty of all nations and international law, particularly the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The partnership will strengthen maritime domain awareness and increase cooperation on major transnational challenges such as people smuggling, arms and narcotics trafficking, climate change, terrorism and illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing. Our partnership is grounded in strong people-to-people links and the invaluable contribution of Indian migrants to modern Australia. As a proud resident of Western Sydney, I can tell you that Harris Park would never be the same without the contribution of our Western Sydney Indian community and so many vibrant parts of the Indian diaspora in Australia.
Senator Abetz, a supplementary question.
I thank the Minister for that extensive answer and ask, can the Minister advise the Senate of other key outcomes of the virtual summit between Prime Minister Morrison and India's Prime Minister Modi last week?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And the Australia-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership is a major and significant reflection of the relationship between our two countries. And it takes our relationship to a new level of practical cooperation, reflecting both the depth and the breadth of our mutual interests. In addition to the CSP text itself, we've signed 8 substantive agreements that will strengthen technical cooperation and create new opportunities for Australian businesses. We'll work more closely than ever with India to build our ties in mining, in critical minerals, in vocational education, training, water resources, public administration, science and technology and defence. And with Minister Reynolds, the Defence Minister, and I are very pleased that we've also agreed to Foreign and Defence Minister 2+2 meetings at least every 2 years. And Australia is just the 3rd country to join such meetings with India, along with Japan and the United States.
Senator Abetz, a final supplementary question.
Minister, how will further cooperation between Australia and India on cyber affairs and critical technologies advance our strategic interests and provide new opportunities for Australian businesses?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Last week, Minister for External Affairs Jay Shankar and I signed a new landmark Australia-India framework agreement on cyber and cyber-enabled critical technologies cooperation. This arrangement will create opportunities to strengthen our technical and economic linkages with a technically aspirational India. A new Australia-India cyber and critical technology partnership will create a research and development fund for our businesses and researchers and support other countries to improve their cyber resilience. Australia and India have a shared vision for an open, free, rules-based and secure internet. And importantly, this will also ensure that cyber and technological cooperation will sit at the core of our new comprehensive strategic partnership as we forge a dynamic Australia-India 21st century relationship.
Senator Watt.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston. Last week it was reported that only 4% of Australians living in bushfire-affected communities have been able to access government support. Why?
The Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you very much, Senator Watt, for his question and his obvious ongoing interest in the bushfire-affected areas of Australia. The specific question that he has asked me, I'm going to have to take on notice because I do not have the necessary information in relation to the 3% number that he is quoting. However, while I have the opportunity to actually add something in relation to the government's response to the bushfire-affected communities in Australia, and we recognise that it has been a very, very traumatic time for those people that have been affected by bushfires, because obviously on top of that they have had to endure the coronavirus pandemic impacts that all Australians and all Australian communities have had to endure as well. So, but what I would like to do is to assure all bushfire-affected communities that they have not been forgotten, and that I acknowledge that the recovery in many areas has been hampered by the COVID pandemic. But the government is focused on addressing bushfire relief and recovery needs with flexibility and speed, and that is why the Prime Minister himself announced on the 11th of May this year a further $650 million in assistance in addition to the $2 billion bushfire recovery fund, which I might say has already been fully committed. $1 billion of this fund has already been delivered and is working to support the locally led effort in response to the bushfire impacts on the ground in these communities, including in my home state of South Australia, and particularly in the Adelaide Hills and the Kangaroo Island area that were so particularly devastated by the two fires that took hold in South Australia over the Christmas-New Year period. And when you add that to the expenditure that from existing measures, this means around $1.4 billion is rolling out across our bushfire-affected communities and supporting individuals within those communities.
Senator Watt, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Stephanie Stanhope lost her home in the Bega Valley on the 4th of January 2020. Struggling to navigate the system, she said, and I quote, "For all the assistance you were led to believe was going to be there, it isn't." Not long after it happened, there was a call from someone in the system saying that each person would be given a mentor to guide them through the process. I've had one phone call. How can we expect bushfire victims like Ms Stanhope to access the system when there's no one to help them navigate the system?
Watt. Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and thank you very much, Senator Watt. As I've often said in this place, if you have individual examples of people who have concerns, whether it would be in my area of social services or whether it be in other areas that I represent, I am more
Senator Watt, on a point of order.
The question is not about an individual example. The question is why there was
I'm going to hear the point of order and then I'll rule on the point of order. Senator Watt.
So the point of order is relevance. The question was about why bushfire victims, like the example, can't access the system.
Senator Watt, I have repeatedly ruled that the part at the end of a question is not the only part of the question. The minister may be directly relevant by being directly relevant to any part of the question. The minister is being directly relevant in this case because you did quote a specific example. Senator Wong.
Mr. President, it is the case that you have, and I think correctly, indicated that—
Order. Let me hear the point of order.
Even when I'm being nice, you'll leave. Really?
Oh, that's harsh.
Order.
Oh, wounded. I am wounded, Eric. All those years at the table. That's now that's mean.
We've still got a day
You
to go
have
this
correctly ruled. You have ruled, and I would indicate we believe correctly that direct relevance can pertain to different aspects of the question. But this minister can't get out of answering anything by simply saying, "Oh, you've mentioned an individual."
No,
that is not the test of direct relevance, and that is the way in which she is using this tactically. She should answer the policy point if she doesn't wish to talk about
Senator
the individual.
Wong, on the point of order, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It was a very broadly introduced question with a range of matters canvassed, and the minister was clearly being directly relevant to the question asked. And as presidents of both political persuasions have ruled during the time that I've been in this chamber,
Order.
the President is not in a position to tell a minister how to answer a question. The President can only require direct relevance, and the minister was being directly relevant to the question.
So, on the point of order, several points. Firstly, I'll reiterate without restating what I said earlier. Secondly, Senator Wong, the minister had only been speaking for 16 seconds, so I'm not in a position to rule on the entirety of her approach. I have said before, and I restate again, that when very specific questions are asked requiring facts of ministers, the term directly relevant will be strictly applied, as I have done. However, I've also said before that to be directly relevant, a minister can directly refer to or address, including challenging material or assertions contained in any question or preamble. The minister was being directly relevant by addressing that part of the question in the 16 seconds for which she'd been speaking. Finally, there is a time after question time where the merits of answers can be freely debated. Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, first of all, I would reject the premise that if you're referring to an individual and then you move to talk about a particular action, that I should think otherwise, that you're actually referring to that individual and their experience. You were talking about people getting access to mentors, and you're referring to Stephanie. Now, I don't know whether the person you're referring to or other people have had access to these particular mentors. I assume they have. And I'm more than happy to find out for you, Senator Watt, as to the merit or otherwise of the accusation that you're making, that because the person that you're referring to hadn't had access to a mentor, it meant that everybody didn't have access to a mentor. But what I would say is this government takes very seriously—
Senator Ruston. Senator Watt, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, Mr Andrew Colvin from the National Bushfire Recovery Agency admitted that there was too much confusion around the bushfire recovery system, and the current system was, and I quote, effectively re-traumatising individuals. Why is this government failing to deliver the promised help and instead re-traumatising individuals?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Senator Watt, for your supplementary question. The government obviously is very focused on making sure that we protect all Australians during this particular time, and that includes those people that have been impacted by bushfires. And I would say that the programs that have been put in place, the substantial programs that have been put in place for the bushfire support measures, are going a long way to assisting Australians who have been impacted by bushfires. But as I said to an answer to my previous question, we acknowledge that there has been the recovery has been hampered in some areas because of the impacts of COVID, but that doesn't mean to say that the extensive programs that have been put in place to take up the bushfire recovery efforts have not been very, very significant. I mean, the small business support that was put in place by Senator Takash, grants up to $10,000 that people were able to get access. The small business grants of up to $50,000 for many within the local government areas that have been designated.
Order, Senator Ruston. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham. Can the minister outline how the Australia-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership will benefit Australia economically, especially regional, agricultural and mining communities in their post-pandemic recovery?
Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Canavan for the question and for his long-standing commitment to the deepening of the Australia-India relationship. Can I acknowledge with that his work, indeed, as part of the many pieces of the puzzle that led, as Senator Payne has outlined to the chamber already, to the successful signing of the comprehensive strategic partnership between Prime Ministers Modi and Morrison last week, and has helped to drive India to the point of being Australia's 5th largest export market. It is a significant relationship for us nowadays, and I was thrilled, Mr President, earlier this year in February to lead a delegation of some 60 businesses, 20 universities and 10 peak industry and research organisations to India, focusing across different fields of food and wine, agribusiness, resources, education, infrastructure and tourism, reflecting very much the fact that in 2019 Australia's resources and energy exports to India were worth almost $13 billion, with metallurgical coal feeding India's ambitious steel manufacturing targets, as well as amounts of gas, gold and copper helping to fuel India's development as well as supporting Australian industries. Our government is equally delivering on growth strategies in the agricultural sector, with training on biosecurity treatments to improve the flow of agricultural products between our two countries. The Australia-India Council has funded Pulse Australia to produce regular guidance notes to better forecast Indian demand for agricultural commodities, and we're developing a grains partnership. We've extended the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund with $15 million through to 23-24 to pursue deeper economic engagement through collaboration in science and innovation. This includes sharing our mining equipment, technology and services expertise into the Indian market, once again helping to grow our economy and India's economy as part of a strong, strategic and mutually beneficial partnership.
Senator Canavan, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How will, Minister, the partnership with India help grow our nation's rare earth industry?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. The Coalition Government takes very seriously the development of Australia's critical minerals industry, and Senator Canavan, more than anybody else, I'm sure, in this place, has contributed to that focus, including the joint announcements that Senator Canavan made in the development of Australia's critical minerals strategy and the new financing measures to help build the critical minerals sector. Our comprehensive strategic partnership with India includes an MOU on cooperation in the field of mining and processing of critical and strategic minerals to increase the flow of trade, investment and R&D in critical minerals, including rare earths. And we've taken a significant step towards establishing ourselves as a reliable supplier of the critical minerals needed to grow India's manufacturing sector and its defence and space capabilities as we seek to grow our own. And the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office is regularly engaged with their Indian counterparts to highlight Australia's potential as a reliable supplier of rare earths elements, and the MOU will strengthen that ongoing dialogue and trade.
Order. Senator Canavan, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How will expanding our trade relationships with other markets help secure long-term and well-paying jobs for regional Australians?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, the opening up of Australia and expansion of our trade relationships has helped to fuel the very strong job and economic position that Australia was in going into the COVID-19 pandemic, and it will be crucial to our success and our rebuilding and coming out of these circumstances. Around 1 in 5 Australian jobs now depends on trade, and under our government we have seen an increase of more than 18% in the number of Australian businesses who export goods to the world. Strong growth equally in the services sector, and in both of these areas we see real potential for stronger growth in the India relationship. Our grains industry, our red meat industry, our sugar industry all appreciate the importance of the international rules-based system and the opening up of those markets. And if we look at Senator Canavan's home state, beef exports from Queensland have increased 40% in the past 5 years. Fruit and nut exports from Queensland have gone up significantly, horticulture and elsewhere, all as a result of these stronger trade
Senator
relationships.
Birmingham. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann. Senator Cormann has on, I think, 6 occasions in a number of questions over the last 2 days declined to express regret or offer an apology to people who have been the victims of the illegal robo-debt scheme, including Nadia Seivright, including Kath Madgwick and including Rachel, who was referred to today. Can the minister explain his refusal to offer regret or an apology when the Prime Minister has just now apologised in the House?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, and that is appropriate for the Prime Minister to do so. The Services Australia, as I've indicated, Services Australia makes $180 billion in payments a year. We received advice at the time as a government that the program was put together, that it was lawful, and many governments indeed have used ATO averaging data over many years, Labor and Liberal, and indeed Ms Plibersek and Mr Shorten and Mr Bowen have previously indicated that it is appropriate to seek to recover debts, but of course it should be made in a lawful. It should be done in a lawful fashion. As I've indicated yesterday, of course it should not have happened in a way that was unlawful.
Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. My supplementary is this. Can the minister explain why it has taken so long for the Prime Minister to offer this apology, and can the minister explain why he is refusing to repeat that apology in this chamber?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much,
Order.
Mr President. Well, I mean, as the Prime Minister has said, as I understand it, the government has great regrets about any pain or injury that has been caused here, and we're making it right, and that is, of course, exactly right.
Senator Wong, a final supplementary question.
Are you kidding?
Mr President, thank you, Mr President. Can the minister explain why the Prime Minister failed until today to do the decent thing and offer an apology for those who are victims of a scheme he designed and implemented as Minister, Treasurer and then Prime Minister? Why did it have to be dragged out of him in question time after a court has found against the government?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Prime Minister, of course, speaks for the government, and the Prime Minister has made the government's position perfectly clear, as have I in this chamber.
Thank you.
So further questions be placed on the notice paper.